Go ahead. You said so let's frame this up, right? You said
Okay.
you sent me an
Yeah.
it was honestly it was the most wholesome moment text I've gotten since you've been away at college all
Really?
these 8 or so weeks because it was like, hey, uh, I'm now
So
at a
funny.
place where I think it would make me feel better to know what you do for a living, but but I think it's an important thing. I understand. I'm extrapolating a bit. It's important for me to
Uh,
understand what do you do, how
hmm.
did you do it, and how did that change over time, and how does that
uh,
relate to what I'm doing now? Because hashtag reasons. Does that about
well,
sound
sort
right?
of. I don't know. I had, so you know how I get like these little impulsive ideas that sprout out of nowhere. Like I've been having them since I was a little kid. I had one that was like, what if I did something? But basically, it's kind of like what dad did, right? And I'm not going to go into the details of what that thing is, but I realized that to understand how to maybe even approach going about that problem, I would need to like the fabrication process is something I'm completely unfamiliar with. So of course it was like rooted in, OpenAI, like that whole thing. That's why I
Sure.
like reached out to you and I just didn't know how you got into the place that you're at now over the last couple of months. And so that's why I was like, I'm gonna text my dad and see what he says.
The
Okay.
other, by the way, wholesome addendum that I got was,
Uh,
can I get access to your GitHub repo to look at your code? Which is like, I
yeah.
never thought I would get to that. Because one, listen, you've heard me make the joke a million times. Me writing code is like a 6-year-old with a hand grenade. It's
Mm.
cute. It'll get the job done, but you probably don't want to be around when it goes off and explodes because
Uh-huh.
it will. So yes, you can learn plenty from looking at my code, but you have to understand you're not going to learn best practices, as it were.
No.
That's just real. Because a lot of
Uh-huh.
my stuff is self-taught, and so we can talk about how I've gone through that in the last, call it 8 or 9 months, when I've really gone all in on trying to like, okay, retooling what I do every day to
Mm.
be writing more code and actually building things versus like consulting and all the other dumb things I was doing after I left Oracle. But
Yeah.
fire away with your first kind of bigger question, and we'll figure out how to narrow it down from there.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go down a list of stuff that I made. What was like your first step one? Like I know that you've definitely had multiple step ones, right? Like you've looped back, kind of gone back, restarted different
Sure.
segments of the project. But what was the very first step that you
Well,
took
you're
for
asking about the
2020?
project or how I got into this as like a general like career. Which
The
do you want to know?
project itself.
The project itself,
Um,
and
yeah.
of the many projects I'm working on, which specifically one do you want to talk about?
Let's do the resume.
Okay, so
Yeah.
all right. So as you know, I started messing around with OpenAI in
Yeah.
March with
Mhm.
GPT SDK, and that was largely because I didn't understand it. Had a conversation with a bunch of really smart people. None of us knew really much beyond the headlines what you could do
Mhm.
with it, except one guy who I trust and respect a lot, who's the CEO of a unicorn. It's a $1 billion valuation business, $1 billion
Yeah.
plus. Said that someone on his team had built a really cool demo and that they were intrigued and they wanted to learn more. So that piqued my interest, but none of us knew enough to really have an intelligent conversation. So this was like mid-March. And so when I got
Mhm.
back from that trip and you saw me at the counter just like hammering away on code for days on end, it was because
Yeah.
once I started playing with the API and realizing it was more than a statistical look ahead model, which would just do single word prediction, and it was more of a
Mhm.
reason. The chat instantiation of their model was more of a reasoning engine. I realized that there was a lot I could do there,
Mhm.
and it's important to kind of wrap this in a little bit of time bounded context, right? So when I was your age, or roughly your age, there was a guy. He's actually at the house this weekend because he was visiting his friend Greg. But Al Hogan, friend of mine
Mhm.
from who you've met before, from Penn, he was the first person to show me Pointcast, which was a precursor. I think the timing I don't because I'm old. I can't remember. Pointcast came before Mosaic web browser, but he was also the first person to show me Mosaic, the web browser, which is Mark Andreessen, who runs Andreessen Horowitz Capital and multi-billionaire guy,
Mhm.
generally regarded as one of the smartest venture capitalists out there. But many moons ago, he was a graduate student at the University of Illinois, Urbana, and he and his team built the first web browser, like the first commercial web browser. It was called
Yeah.
Mosaic. And then they went out and started a company called Netscape, which doesn't exist anymore. And that kind of kicked off the whole of the internet revolution, right? I remember the exact place I was. I was in Steinberg Dietrich in the computer lab when Al showed this to me. And I remember thinking, and I might have even vocalized, oh, our world just changed. I had that same reaction the first time I really understood what I was doing with the API on OpenAI.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I've had that reaction more than maybe one or two other times in my life. So it was to me a big deal that what it could do. And so then I got really excited, like, okay, what else can it do? So that's kind of part one. But part two was, as you know, the interview coaching business that kind of evolved out of nothing kind of evolved by inertia, because I don't like saying no to people who want help, and it was something I could do, and a couple of videos a week. It was generating a lot of income for not a ton of hours. But as you know, I hate things just landing on my calendar and not really knowing what I'm doing day to day. And it became a huge stress point of like, I would go to bed and not know if I had to like completely rearrange my day around, you know, people who wanted or needed help. They were paying me money, sure, so that was great, but it was, I didn't like that. And here's a business lesson, right? So trading dollars for hours generally doesn't scale. So I was fortunate that I got great jobs at places like Microsoft, Amazon, et cetera, where they paid a lot of dollars per hour. So it scaled pretty well, and I've done okay in life. But for the most part, you don't really get those nonlinear outcomes unless you build your own thing, right? Because no one's going to pay you nonlinearly when they're trying to get paid nonlinearly. It just doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
And so I knew that I wanted to replace myself in the context of doing these interview coaching calls, right? And so I started to try and build software in November. And then I realized, oh, no, this isn't going to work, because natural language processing, Python's NLK libraries just wasn't good enough at all. And then I started playing with this, and I realized, oh, this might enable me to build a thing that can replace me in the context of helping people prepare for interviews. And so I started building Lupala, and what is essentially the engine that you've seen that evaluates the interviews. Now, you asked specifically about the resume stuff. The challenge with doing the interviews is people that are that far down the funnel. So if you think about kind of people who think about looking for jobs, people who work on their resume, but like you kind of work your way down a funnel. By the time they were getting to me for the coaching calls, like those are like, it's a really refined funnel set of hard to reach people who are willing to pay a lot of money, but there's just not a lot of them. It's not big. So I wanted to move up the funnel and figure out how to help more people, but also a wider addressable market. And that was people who are working on their interviews, right? Trying to get the first interview phone call. And my inspiration came from realizing that, and having worked at Microsoft and all the companies I've worked at, and we've used these ATS systems, I know that the job is no longer to get your resume in front of the right person. You actually have to get past a machine first. And while those machines have existed and they're basically doing keyword matching, they might have implemented some form of AI now that it's existed for a while. But for the most part, you're basically trying to get your resume past a machine to then get it scored high enough that a human will look at it. That's hard to do, right? And if you're not tailoring your resume to match the language of the job descriptions, you might get lucky, but why not do the extra work? The problem is that extra work is hard. And so about maybe 2 months ago, I challenged myself to see if I could build an engine based on what I now understood about OpenAI's stack to rewrite resumes based on a job description, right? And my, kind of bake in all of my knowledge around that. And that involved iterating around testing things for different steps of that and building out what ultimately was the code base I gave you access to, is a very large single file script of like multiple steps in a ordered workflow. That was built with the intent of ultimately moving to the cloud, so it was running on my laptop. That's why I built it that way. So you'll get a bit confused by the code and why I didn't just have it go straight through. That's why. So I could easily just kind of rip code blocks out and copy and paste and put it into Lambda on AWS. And so what I wanted to do was address the problem of that more people have, which is I'm not getting called, right? If you go look on LinkedIn right now, you can look at any of the jobs that are posted. If you have a premium account, you can see more, but if you don't have a premium account, it says over 50. Like just about every job that's recommended to me, over 50 people have applied, right? I had one friend who wanted to use the resume rewriting service, and he had sent me a screenshot of a job that he was applying to, and in 24 hours, 272 people had applied.
272.
Right? And so when you think about what the job market looks like, that's a hard problem to get past the gatekeeper, which is the machine, which is the ATS system. So that's the problem I'm trying to solve with the help you write your resume better and be more tailored to a specific job description. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
That was a lot of words for
it was a lot of words.
The why, but so there's that. So what else?
Yeah. So the ultimate step one for you was I had this idea and I'm going to make it work.
It's just it comes down to I want to help more people. At the end of the day, I want to help candidates do better in the totality of their job search process. That's part one. And part two is I honestly want to give companies better tools to make their surfacing of candidates more humanized, right? Because think about that job we were just talking about. 272 people apply, But the HR people who are dealing with the inbound resumes and dealing with the ATS system, maybe a hiring manager, they're overwhelmed. They're not going to reply to all 272, right? They'll reply to the top 10 or 15 and say, we want to talk to you. But the other 250 or so people will never hear from the company again. That's kind of broken when you think about it, right? It's kind of like getting ghosted. But because it's so easy to apply for jobs on, say, LinkedIn or ZipRecruiter or whatever, you as an individual could apply to 50 jobs, right?
Like the
Pretty easily.
college app,
Click, right?
sort of. Like that reminds me of college ads, like the way that everybody was applying to like 50 schools just because they could click a button.
Exactly the
Same
same.
thing. Okay.
Great analogy. It's exactly like the Common App for college, right? So
Yeah.
you click because you can, but the problem is maybe the total universe of job applicants doesn't necessarily go up, but the percentage of that universe that applies to any one given job goes up. And what that does is it creates this sense of you've now applied to 50 places and you heard from none of them. And your friends take you out and they say, how's the job search going? You know what you say? Terrible. I applied to like 50 jobs. I'm not hearing anything. It's because they're overwhelmed, not because they hate you and they want you to feel bad about yourself. But that's how most people will react is, oh my God, I'm awful. I'm terrible. Nobody wants to talk to me.
Yeah.
That's so bad, right? And so I part of all of what I'm building then dovetails into providing these companies with tools to better handle the, hey, you didn't get in. You didn't make it through our first pass filter, but here's our second pass filter, and give them some agency, the individuals who are applying to jobs, give them some agency to maybe answer an interview question, a bespoke interview question that's tailored to their resume. And if they type out their answer and it's graded high enough by my system, maybe they get pushed to the top of the stack again and say, well, this person actually took the time. They wrote out a thoughtful answer. It actually seems pretty smart. Let's talk to them, right? Because what you can represent about yourself in a resume, it's sparse data in a lot of ways. Because if you think about the totality of your career, it's pretty sparse data. And it doesn't give you a lot, me as an evaluator, a lot of richness around how you solve problems, how you work, how you get along with people, how you think about it. But that will come out in a singular interview answer. I'm like, oh, this person's really organized and they really thought deeply about the holy smokes, this person's really smart. I want to talk to them. Or, yeah, no, this is pretty helter-skelter, scattershot answer. This is, circular reasoning. This is not good. Yeah, great. Okay. And I can move on. You learn a lot more in the interview. It's why we want to do the interviews. The problem is doing face-to-face or even phone interviews doesn't scale. You only have so many hours in a day. So that is why ATS systems or applicant tracking systems exist. It's to kind of be that first pass filter, but ultimately it's a hurt feelings generator.
Hurt feelings generator. I like that. I like the way you put that. So kind of switching to the actual coding. Like I saw you for months essentially on the sofa with your little Bose quiet comforts, I think they are on. You're tapping away at your computer, and I know you would say stuff about, turning around, like nothing's working right now. Oh my gosh. And you'd either keep pushing at it or you restart. So like I don't know how many times you've restarted within the project. I know I was looking through your GitHub and you were like, I just completely scrapped this at one point and then just copy pasted it over and kept going. What were those top kind of restart points for you? When did they happen?
Sure.
Why did they happen? What did you do to combat them?
So I knew enough about the OpenAI API to kind of function effectively around building a call and response type setup where for each step of my evaluative workflow, it's literally just a frame the prompt correctly, ask it. Sometimes you get content back and ask a second thing or a third thing, but it's how do you conversate? In fact, the function that you'll see inside the code is called conversate. And that is the simplified function I wrote to handle the going back and forth, which is I have a set of prompts. I might want to add to it. Fine. Conversate. And I hand that off to a function. It goes and it makes the appropriate OpenAI call. And then it returns to me what OpenAI said and how much it cost in terms of tokens, because I track everything so that I know what's expensive versus not. And one of the hard parts about working with OpenAI is it can be a bit haughty and a bit stuck up in how it responds. And even if you specifically say, just give me the answer, it'll be like, of course I can help you. It does things like that where it tries to be helpful and it adds a line of text. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with computer systems and you're expecting a data structure and you try to load that data structure, but it turns out the data structure has a string in front of it, everything breaks. And it wasn't reliable in how it was giving data back. Like it was super frustrating. And then I got really excited because they released a thing called functions, which basically says you can define a JSON object that you expect back and it will fill it out as best as it can. And that's where you saw I had to start over. I tried to use it and it was returning nulls for everything. And it wasn't working. And so I said to myself, let me pause there. So it was giving me back nulls. And the problem was the thing that I was asking it to do is actually
Mhm.
quite complex, right? So if you think about what I'm doing is you give me a resume and a job description, and I have to go figure out stuff about those things. So the first question I ask of OpenAI is, here, I rip the text out of the file, I pass it over to
Mhm.
OpenAI, and the question is this a resume or job description? Do you recognize this as what I say it is? And if it says
Yeah.
no, then I quit and I don't proceed, and it just bounces out of the fine, and it just stops,
Yeah.
right? Which is great. But if it then says yes, I then say, cool, I'm going to ask you some questions about it. Now, if you
Mhm.
think about what prior to OpenAI existing, what would be required to read in a document that you've never seen before and parse all of the information out of it and turn it into a structured data object? Holy smokes, is that hard? Give me
Mhm.
all of the work experience, the personal information, their bullet points, the dates that they worked there, what city it was, all of that information. I try to do it with Python, what's it called? Natural language, NLP or something like that. It's NTK or something like that, TKL, something like that. But
Yeah.
there's a library that everyone
Natural
uses,
language
and
processing.
it's key value pairs basically. It's key pairs, whatever it's called. But anyways, it was very complex to get going, and I was just staring at it, scratching my head. I'm like, ugh, this is not going to work. And so
Yeah.
then I asked myself, can OpenAI disambiguate? If I give it a string of text, can it tell me things about the file? And I
Mm.
started with functions, and it kept coming back no. And I'm like, oh God, I'm not going to be able to do this because I can't extract the information from this file. That's a problem. So when I started over, it was actually fortuitous because when I was using their functions capability, I thought it can't figure out what's in the resume because it just kept returning nulls. And I'm like, oh, this sucks. I can't do it. So I said, all right, let me
Yeah.
remove this one piece that's new, which is the functions bit, and just ask it, hey, give me a Python list of what companies this person's worked at. And that worked.
Okay.
Okay, functions is broken. Let me restart and whatever. But then it was, now I got to figure out how to ask it to give me structured data back and do it consistently. Because that's the problem. If your code breaks while it's running because it gets something back, it's like, ugh, because you get a sentence in front of a JSON object, or sometimes it doesn't give you it's annoying. So I have figured
Mhm.
out ways to poke the machine to effectively give me a JSON object for what I want and how I define
Yeah.
it about 95% of the time. But even before you and I are doing this call, I was doing a run with my own resume against a job
Mhm.
on LinkedIn as part of another video that I'm putting together, kind of give an update on the channel. And it broke in a couple places in one place because of that. And it was annoying. And I'd go in, it was one of the prompts that I had not fixed the way I knew it had to do because it had never broken there before. And so I was like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I went and fixed it. But it works 95-ish% of the time, which is fine, but not perfect. But now that I have all the code deployed and it's working and up in the cloud and whatnot, now I can go back and retool and kind of one by one add functions to the conversate function call. And if the function object is there, great. If it's not, ignore it and just move on. So I don't really have to change a bunch of code, and I can see if that'll work. We'll see. I have high hopes. But after yesterday, so OpenAI had their developer day yesterday, which was not really a
Yeah.
developer day. It felt more like a keynote and like, let us talk at you and tell us how we're going to blow up your AI business. But it wasn't super inspiring as a developer because it was like, oh man,
Yeah.
like they just released a bunch of cool stuff, but I have to now worry like at every turn, are they going to destroy anything I'm building because they added something that makes it super, not easy, but close enough, easy to do something that's close enough that someone's gonna be like,
Yeah.
why would I pay you? I can just use this. And so that is
Um,
it's a source of consternation amongst some of the indie devs on Twitter right now. They're all freaking out like, is this thing that they just released good enough in
mhm.
terms of what I've already built and what people say they want to use?
Yeah.
How do I feel about this? So,
Do you have that fear for your own product
huh?
or no? Do you have that fear for your own product?
Do I have what?
Like the fear that it will somehow get taken over by the
I do. I
big
100%
green
do.
AI monster? Okay.
100%. I guarantee
Like
you, with the agents
more
API
so?
they just released,
Okay.
someone is going to put up a resume agent. It's not going to be
Huh.
good because the level of control that you have in their agent object, the way it's implemented now through their UX, is pretty rudimentary, which means everything's going to sound the same. If you look at the amount of code I've written and the number of steps and the process by which I disambiguate a resume and then ask for specific things, it's very specific and very detailed around specific things, which is why if you
Mhm.
feed a resume into GPT today, just go to chatgpt.com or whatever, and just feed in a resume and a job description and say, hey, rewrite my resume for this job description, it's going to be very generic. And it won't tell you why it's better. And it won't specifically address the issues that I know that need to be addressed. So someone else eventually build that in? Sure, it's possible, but it's going to be really hard to do with the UX and the tooling that was released yesterday. Could someone do it with the the API and the SDK? Maybe. It just came out yesterday, and I literally, my brain was so hurting by the end of the day because I was trying to fix bugs with one feature yesterday, and I finally got it working. Turns out I didn't get it working. I got it working, running locally on my laptop. Cool. But once I tried to run the code from the cloud, from the hosted endpoint as opposed to the local host on my laptop, the download of the document broke. So I got to figure it. It has something to do with cross-site security, which is fine. I'll figure it out, but it's annoying. So So that was the restart. That was the major one, was just around the function calling, because it was unclear to me that I was going to be able to get the data that I wanted in a structured way out of the document without going and learning how to do natural language processing, which would be a nightmare for someone who doesn't have a natural language processing background.
Awesome. Yeah, and I actually had a kind of a related question to that. Essentially, how are you going to ensure that this product stands out? Because I know that AI as a buzz term, it's big. A lot of people, like, I've spoken to a lot of parents. It's Parents Weekend, or it was Parents Weekend. So I spoke to a lot of parents, and then they were just kind of like, yeah, I've been thinking about doing something with ChatGPT, and there was a lot of, I've been thinking about doing stuff. So it's on people's minds.
Yeah.
It didn't sound like they were actually gonna do anything with it. Like maybe they would try building something and had given up or were interested. But overall, it's like it's a big popular hot topic right now, and everybody's gonna want to try and make something with it. So it sounds like you've got, or I know that you have a good product. Like, you used it on my own resume. I was reading through this. I was like, what the F?
It's crazy, right?
But I was baffled, right? And so I handed that off to people at Career Day. You know this, right? I know it functions, right? So how are you going to make sure that stands out? Because
so let's back up. Let's back up. So you said a lot of people said they were thinking about blah blah blah. You'll remember that I never called you names, right? We always treated you as an adult, but I did have a word that I used with you a lot. Do you remember what that word was?
Forgetful?
No. When I was talking about like
the
wansta. No, you were a wansta. I want to do this. I want to do that, right? Yeah, now you remember. Yeah, right. So it's the same thing. They're called wantrepreneurs, right? There's people that will talk about, I have this idea that I'm going to go pursue. I'm just waiting for the time to be right. I just need this much money in the bank. I just, there's a lot of people like that. So everyone always has an idea. In fact, I just had a post blow up on Twitter last week about confessions of a former idea guy, basically. But idea guys are the worst, right? Because they figure that the idea is worth 90% of the value. I'm going to go find some dumb developer to build this thing for me, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is that, as you point out, the hardest part is getting customers, right? You can build a great product, but if nobody knows about it, nobody cares. Or you build a decent product and find a huge market with a lot of desire and need and just strike gold, and it works out well for everybody. The challenge in the resume space is there have been a lot of tools available for kind of resume rewrites, and there's a lot of coaching and whatnot. So how do you stand out in that space? Which is why I look at, or I'm going to try and define the space as candidate tooling, not resume tooling, right? So it's the candidate solutions, right? I need to work on my resume. I need to work on my year-end review is another thing that could go in there. I need to work on my interview questions, right? But all of that can be built as a candidate solutions stuff. That's part one. But part two is just talking to customers, right? And hearing what their problems are, and then, kind of speaking to them in the language I use on the site, which if you look at the copy of Lupala, it's terrible. It was all kind of hashed together stuff that I wrote, and I haven't put a ton of time in it because it's not released yet. So I'm not really worried about it. And I really, in theory, should be spending more time on it. Because I'm trying to do too many things, haven't put the time into the copy. But at the end of the day, the thing that has driven the most interest and awareness has been being authentically me publicly, which is talking about what I'm doing, why, the heartbreaks, the wins, etc. But doing that in a public way has attracted attention. Now you got to be careful about what you do, because you don't want to attract attention to an idea that's easy to implement that someone else comes in and executes faster and blows you out of the market. So I have to be careful about that. But at the end of the day, before Amazon did their hiring freeze and then all the other companies followed suit and traffic to the YouTube channel fell off quite a bit, it's been starting to slowly trickle back up, which tells me I can start putting out videos again, which I was recording. I did a bunch of takes to try and chop something together earlier today. So hopefully I'll get that out later this week. But But the reality is that that's how I was driving a lot of awareness for what I was doing, because I'm genuinely presenting myself as an expert who's talking about these problems, who's providing solutions, not saying you should, right? You should do this or you should do that, or here's the top 10 tricks to that's not, I talk about the problems and how we're solving them and what we can do about it. And then, iterating. And that seems to be an effective approach for me for now. But at the end of the day, you have to build something that stands out. And for the people, the hardest part about dealing with people who are looking for a job is obviously they're cash conserving and they're very cautious because they're in panic mode, right? Because they're maybe out of a job or whatever. And so I had someone 2 weeks ago say, well, how can you prove this will get me the interview? I'm like, hold on a second. I can't. That's impossible, right? You could be a complete imbecile and use this product. And if you don't have the work experience, no amount of retouching to your resume is going to get you past a screener. I can only do so much. If you have a bad resume, you have a bad resume, period, full stop. I can make it look better, but that's lipstick on a pig. At the end of the day, you need to have the experience that's going to resonate for the role. So if you're close, this will get you over the line. If you're too far away, I can get you close to the line, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'll get you over the line. That's problem number one. But people want proof before they use a thing. Okay, fine. But that's where the videos help, because people can see my body of work and see that I actually know what I'm talking about and I'm not some knuckleheaded clown. I've been called direct. Fine. It's a nice way of saying that I speak my opinion, right? But that's fine. I'm not a wallflower. I don't kind of prevaricate in my answers. I'm very direct and I'm blunt. Some people that doesn't resonate with, and I'm okay with that. But they know that I'm intellectually honest and that I'm very thorough in my process. And generally when they watch the videos, like, yeah, no, that's really good feedback, really good advice. If you go read the feedback on the videos, it's all generally net positive. I don't know there's ever been there might be one or two out there, which is like, this guy's a clown. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. For sure. Those people are going to exist. Haters are going to hate. I also don't have enough subscribers to have gotten to the point where I'm getting all the spam comments, but such is life. So standing out's going to be hard, but it's just keep building awesome stuff and servicing customers well. And it just, it becomes a thing that people talk about. Now, once I have the conversion loop sorted out, then I can start pouring gas into the engine. And by that, I mean going and doing like paid search ads and stuff like that. But doing that now before I understand whether or not I have true product market fit, or if I'm doing landing page conversions correctly, it would just be a complete waste of energy. It's where people want to go to first. Oh, if we just buy ads and blah, 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 and send traffic. No. If you're not converting on the traffic you're getting, then why would you just go pour gasoline on that fire? That would be stupid.
Yeah.
So
there's another time. Cool. Yeah. I mean, that ultimately makes sense, right? Like as a product, you've made something that it's unique, right? I'm kind of reiterating stuff that I already said. It's unique in the sense that, like you said, it's focusing on, you said the client, God, what was the word? Starts with a C. Not client,
customers,
interview,
candidates.
customers, no. Candidates. It's candidate based, right?
Yep.
How are you going to convey that is what makes it different? Because when I hear candidate based, I'm like, okay, and I kind of get what it means, but I am someone with little to no, like,
don't have an answer for you right now. My head is still.
Battery is running low. I might have to find that out.
A few minutes later.
The struggles of doing my college.
All right, again, so candidate systems, go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so reiterate to me what about that makes it kind of special, because you said like versus like resume, candidate. Resume is like the resume, candidate is like the whole person.
So what you'll hear when you hear product managers or kind of senior folks talk about a product that they're building, they talk about a product journey, a customer journey. What is the customer doing? How do they spend their day? And how do they end up engaging with your product the first time? And then how does that build over time, right? And the reality is the customer journey for somebody who's looking for a new job starts with updating their resume, right? They gotta dust off the old, I gotta dust off the old resume.
Yeah,
right? Because LinkedIn, as much as it is a source of like inbound recruiting, it never really reflects your current job. Because you can't breathe on your profile on LinkedIn without your boss finding out about it. And then like, why are you updating your LinkedIn profile? So it's not, it's kind of a best of reel, but it's not like the stuff that matters. And so like, you only ever update your resume for the next company you're going to work at. And then no one else sees it except the next companies that you might work at. So that's kind of that part of the funnel. Many people have that problem. I need to dust off and fix my resume. Then there's I got the job interview. Then there's I'm going to actually spend the time preparing for my interview. A lot of people just go in and wing it. And then there's the help me negotiate my package. I don't want any part of that. But, working through that customer journey of, I am getting into a new job. How do I solve for my resume, getting it seen, the interviews, performing well, and then ultimately once I land the job, there's no reason why I couldn't add with the same engine, now that I know what it can do and how to make it do what I want it to do, improving your performance reviews, so that you're actually speaking about the things that you're doing in a more professional way and doing so that highlights things that you did or maybe you forgot to add or whatever. And so you get this thing that gets written into stone is like your performance, but it's like your boss has somebody to read. They're not gonna be like, well, how come you didn't put this metric here that would have helped and made you look better and blah, blah, right? So how do you do your performance reviews better? I think ultimately those kind of go away over time, performance reviews. I may be wrong. So I'm not focused on that right now, but the candidate pipeline from dust off resume to job interview, I want to help them show up better.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And ultimately,
and everybody has those problems, right?
Yeah. The showing up better it's kind of the multitude of things from, the resume being not just a list of things you've done, but like a list of activities you've done, things you've accomplished, right? The things you've done versus things you've accomplished.
Outcomes with metrics.
You've generated with metrics. That's important. I've honestly forgotten about that portion. So you add the metrics that kind of like it brings the whole thing together, as well as prepping to actually speak about those. Do you think you're going to link those in the future? Like you're going to use, hey, this is what your resume says. This is like what you could talk about. Like that's going to kind of be the ultimate product.
Yes, awesome. Because the way Lupala works now, right? If you give it a resume, it can generate interview questions, bespoke interview questions, and then outline your answer for you. It doesn't fill in the blanks, but it gives a star format outlined kind of answer for how you should approach that specific question, given your resume information, which is kind of cool.
That is quite cool because, obviously can't see into your past life and be like, oh yeah, March of 2013, I know that you were working there and, this day you helped so-and-so solve this problem, did wonders for the company. I mean, sure, you could, if it was already on there, you could add metrics, but it probably couldn't go little details. That's for you to decide, like as the candidate. Yeah. Okay, cool. So, I mean, honestly, I'm guilty of this. I've done some searching online for like similar tools, like AI-based resume, whatever, just out of curiosity as to whether or not another thing like this exists. And this is kind of going off topic for my own question.
No, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them that claim to have AI-based, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of these tools. A lot of them exist. Yep.
None of them have really done the same thing in years. And I think that is certainly something that I think would be beneficial in like really emphasizing the to-do goes to grow to popular base. Because I haven't tested them, but I've looked at, their samples, their testimonials. It's like, it made it seem more professional. It kind of laid it out better. Because what I have, whatever, it's spell checked. And like, I don't, if you need a tool to spell check your resume,
spell checking, you have failed the process entirely.
That's rough. That's rough. But, I mean, ultimately it's just taking it to be a more professional looking resume, but it's not a more professional sounding resume.
Correct. Because, a lot of people right now get confused that they need to have style on their resume. And again, your job, your objective is to get past the machine. The machine does not care what your resume looks like. And in fact, too much formatting hurts you with the machine because the machine gets confused and can't parse your resume correctly. But people don't want to accept this. They don't want to believe it's true. Because they think like people, not machines. I think more like a machine and less like people. So it's easier for me to understand that.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Sorry. I know you're a person. You're a person. You have heart. You're not a tin man or anything. But yeah, I mean, hydrate. You're holding a laptop. I see you. I see you there. You're like,
old habits.
I digress. But yeah, I mean, that is how you plan to make your product stand out, right?
Yes.
Is saying, hey,
this is what it is.
Big thing.
Talk about the value that's delivered and the outcome that they will achieve, right? You don't want to talk about products and features. You want to talk about outcomes. You want to talk about things that it's going to accomplish. What job, when you talk about like, what is the job of that product? There's a great book. What's it called? It's called, is it Clay Shirky? think it's called Clay Shirky. Anyways, I'll go look at which book it was, but basically the concept is there's a company that was selling milkshakes, and they couldn't figure out why they were selling so many milkshakes at like 9 o'clock in the morning. Like, what? This doesn't make any sense, right? Why are we selling so many? Like, they couldn't figure it out, right? So they hired a consultant, came in, and that consultant ended up doing the right thing, which is go talk to customers that are ordering milkshakes. Say, hey, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? And it turns out the job of the milkshake was not to be a milkshake. It was a breakfast replacement object, because people were hurried and rushed and leaving the house without eating. And so they saw the drive-thru, and they stopped the drive-thru, and they're like, oh, let's get a milkshake. And it's, it fills me up and blah, blah, blah. And so it was a surprising understanding of what is the job that your product is actually doing for a customer, because that job that it accomplishes is going to be different for different personas of your customer base. Did that just blow your mind?
That didn't blow my mind. I thought you were about to make a serious joke about
No
the
jokes.
song. No, yeah, I was ready. I was like bracing myself because
no jokes. That is 100% real. I'll find the book so I can send you to. But it was when you understand what job that your product is actually solving, it becomes easier for you to talk in a way and market in a way that helps your ideal customers find you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's mostly, it's not inherently entirely a process of trial and error, but it's like some of it is dumb luck. Like the milkshake, they didn't release that milkshake with it's like, oh boy, people are going to see the milkshake and want breakfast and eat it for breakfast,
no,
right?
That's why they were surprised by it.
They latched onto it, and then they kept going with it.
Yeah, they were surprised by it. So how do you lean into it, right? You talk about the great breakfast milkshake, whatever. You can change your marketing appropriately, right? Right. Give people permission. Give additional people permission to make the same decision. By by acknowledging that that's what it's doing, some people will be like, "Oh, that is a great breakfast." And all of a sudden, sales grow even more, right? Because you're giving people permission to believe in a thing.
And have you, in this process, had any milkshakes per se so far?
So, when I started building or starting to learn or teaching myself JavaScript back in November, I was trying to build something that would help people structure their answers better, right? It's kind of like a UI for like a document creation system. And as cool as I thought as it was, and I showed it to a few customers, they kept coming back to two problems. One, that's great. I need to get the interview first. That was problem number one. But number two, it was too hard for them to wrap their brains around an FAQ style preparation for an interview. It was just too hard. To get to that point was too hard. What they really wanted was, I just want to give you my answer and get feedback. So I was trying to cross too many bridges with them before just kind of dealing with the first problem, which is, hey, I just need help with my answer. But if you can give them help with their answer in the format of, well, here's how you would structure a star format. And then if you actually break it apart, here's the FAQ questions you probably want to answer. If you do that consistently enough, you're going to find the FAQs are largely the same. Therefore, you won't get lost in your answers in interviews, because even if you get caught flat-footed on something you haven't prepared for, you can work through the questions in your mind. It's like, I'm just going to answer them in this order mentally as I'm telling this story, right? And that's how you can kind of get them there. And so the problem that it was solving is giving them the immediacy of the feedback of, I need help, I need coaching, I'm nervous, I'm scared, right? They're worried about what. So you can give them something quick and easy, but then sell them the harder thing. Not sell them, but give them the more difficult thing. That's not what you lead with. You lead with, we can make your interview answers better. It's a simple thing to understand. The how of it, they can learn later. But if you lead with the how of it, it can confuse people. Like, I don't know that I want that. That sounds really complicated, right? As you like saw, the output of the resume writer software, if going full blast, is a massive report with a lot of content that can be like, ew, what is going on here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was like 18 pages long for me, and I didn't even. I am.
Oh, it can get as high as 40 pages.
With like, I don't have a lot of work experience. I mean, I have like internship, 2 research jobs. Like that's kind of it. Like I don't have years of work experience. I don't have this deal that I don't even know what goes on like the resume of someone. Like, I mean, I kind of do. I do have access to your old resumes, but really I don't. Really I don't know. So I mean that was like, I parsed through it because I wanted to, but I can understand how somebody would be like, this is too much work. I just want the easy answer, because like people want the easy way out. Like
they want the easy button,
right? Yeah, the easy button. And
love
so
the easy button.
You're sort of kind of like making an easy button, but also tricking them into like not having an easy button, because you're teaching along the way. You're like, oh, sorry, I just like shifted my laptop. You're teaching them like the star method. I remember when you gave that talk, right? I was sitting in the little
I got
front
invited
row,
back.
kind of watching it. Oh, you did?
Yep.
Oh my gosh, when
They
are you
want me to
going
come out
back?
December 4th.
December 4th? Ah, that's so amazing. That's so cool. But yeah, I remember when you were giving that talk and kind of walking through the star, I'd never heard of it before. I don't think that you'd really, I mean, you'd shared it with me probably indirectly
Nah,
throughout,
there's no reason for you to have
teachings,
heard of it.
fatherly knowledge
Yep.
that was somehow like transpiring. Um, but it was good, right? And so I think that with this tool, how are you implementing that exactly? Like I know that through the
That's
resume, it's
deep.
been like,
Yeah, I mean, it's,
what was
yeah,
that?
we don't have time for that today. We can do that as part
Vague.
two of a talk, but
We could do that at a different call. That's okay. Star call.
yeah,
Next call, next video, something like
sure.
that. Like and subscribe for more,
Like and
something like
subscribe
that.
for
Can
more.
I say
That's right.
that? Can I say that? Am I allowed to say
I
that?
have a feeling people are going to like
Uh,
and subscribe for you, not like and subscribe for me, but that's a different discussion.
you. Oh my God, how kind. Um, yeah, and I guess like
I'm so
one.
surprised. Oh my God.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Oh
you
my
so
God.
much.
I love this question.
One more question
Sure.
that's not necessarily related to anything. Are there any like procedural mistakes that you've made in the fabrication of this tool so far that were like in hindsight avoidable? Like, I mean, at the time you
Yeah,
obviously didn't
sure.
avoid them, but like
Sure. Of
what's a really
course.
big one? Or like two or three or however many you
Not
want to say.
figuring out the function methodology that OpenAI offers in their SDK to get
Mhm.
JSON data back on a reliable basis. Now, they literally yesterday released an update to the function calling with it's a slider to
Yeah.
turn on JSON mode. So I think they've heard enough feedback that even the function calling didn't necessarily do it correctly. So I'm glad I didn't
Man.
invest in it because it wasn't necessarily
Mhm.
working, and I needed my stuff to work, so it works. But that's something I need to go spend time in. So that was one. Two. There. So getting code to run on your computer, just a Python script that uses a few libraries, relatively straightforward. Once you add into the mix, okay, I want the data to live in a database in the cloud, and I want a web front end that I want authenticated to get to, and I want to be able to kick off the process that generates all of the outputs. It gets written to the data. Like things explode in complexity when you start adding all of those
Yeah.
things. And so having built Lupala to a point where I understood enough about how to build React, which is a JavaScript framework, React apps, using Amplify, which is Amazon's AWS web service for kind of deploying serverless apps. I learned enough there that I could just start this thing and be fine on the front end. Cool. And I built enough of the front end to allow me to create an account and drop files on and get to the point where it kicks off the workflow. Now that all has to go to the back end. So I have two separate products. I have Big Tech Ivy, the front end, and Big Tech Ivy, the back end. The back end is the workflow, which is a step function, which is it's one of the features of Amazon Web Services called step function. It allows you to string together a bunch of things and pass data through from step to step in a JSON object so that you can kind of create a complex workflow of bits and pieces that don't know about each other, which is nice. But then how do I write all that as Lambda functions? Lambda functions are basically serverless functions that live in AWS's infrastructure that I can call and they run and then tear themselves down. I didn't have to set up a server to allow myself to run all these. That's great. The problem was how I learned how to build Lambda functions and the right way to do it, which is using the server, what's it called, SAM, server appliance model, serverless appliance, something, serverless, not appliance, serverless something, SAM, is their way of doing it's infrastructure as code. So you basically define this gigantic file to talk about what it is you're building so that it knows how to construct it and deploy it correctly so that I can do everything in VS Code instead of having to do it through the UX, the AWS console UX. And so I wasted a ton of time like fiddling about with the AWS console instead of like just biting the bullet and learning how to do it using the CLI, the command line interface, because it felt overwhelming. Because AWS has a CLI, Amplify has a CLI, and SAM has a CLI. So it's all these CLIs. You got to learn the commands, blah, blah, blah. It's like, which is where the GPT, the ability to chat with it, has come in super handy for me because it is an infinitely patient tutor that I can ask questions of. I'm like, hey, I'm stuck on this. I'm trying to figure this out. How do I do it? Oh, yeah, you just need to change it now. Sometimes it does this. And I literally have, as part of my recording earlier today, like I asked it a question and it gave me an answer. I'm like, nope, cancel. Like I stopped the answer. I'm like, that's completely wrong. There's no way. And then I sat and I thought for a second, I'm like, oh, wait, no. And I looked at it, I'm like, oh, no, because I know a thing and I know this. I'm like, this doesn't exist because I did a git clone. This folder didn't come down. That's why it's not working. And so it's little things like that where, because I didn't give it enough information, it gave me what probably was a correct answer, but not for my specific use case. So that you kind of get into these swirls. But
Yeah.
now I've built everything so it all lives on my Git repository, and I can do building and deployment and all that as code. So I never have to touch the AWS UX, which can be a bit fiddly and annoying and slow. And so when you get into bugs, when you deploy your code and you got to edit, you like edit in VS Code to get the type checking, but then, or whatever, you know, your IntelliSense, and then you go and copy and paste and drop that into a file, and it worked.
Yeah.
But I should have ripped that Band-Aid off earlier and learned how to use the SAM CLI, which now makes it so much easier for me to I just can work in VS Code and like, oh, this broke. Let me go in and figure out what's going on. Oh, okay, this works. Fix it. You know, deploy. Poof, off it goes. And I don't ever have to go into the UX, which is great. So that was something I wish I'd learned earlier. But again, I've learned so many things. It's hard to know without GPT as like a co-pilot how long it would have taken me, if at all, to figure all this out. I'm sure I would have hit stopping points where I just threw up my hands and said, I can't figure this out on my own because I don't have
And
someone I can ask questions to.
A lot of using GPT as like kind of the tutor, you called it, in that sense, wasn't just asking it questions, it was learning how to ask it those questions.
Well, that's where my product management background comes in handy, because I recognize that if you know, the joke I make with your mom, right? She sent me to the store and said, hey, can you do me a favor and buy milk? And if they have eggs, get 6. And I came home with 6 bottles of milk. And she's like, what the hell? Same problem, right? If you learn how to talk to developers, you can get them to do anything. But, you know, as a product manager, you have to learn how to talk to developers and cover all of the corner cases and all of the if-thens, because if you don't, they're going to interpret it how they interpret it, which is probably correct based on what you gave them. So there are ways to ask questions of GPT to get answers that are probably correct, but not correct for what you're trying to do because you didn't ask the question correctly. And because of my background and learning how to kind of take a step back and think about all the different ways in which you have to present information to get your point across, to ask the question in a concise way, it has helped me a lot, I think.
Yeah. I know that you've spoken tons about, you know, getting it to get the right answers based on, you know, the input that you're giving it. And that's definitely been not just in the troubleshooting sense, but like the actual generation of product sense. So that's kind of one of the more number one things to keep in mind. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right.